The mailbag is back after about a month off, and today we are going to determine whether or not this is a defining season for Marcus Freeman and how the Irish are preparing to play on the road at Texas A&M, plus a whole lot more.
You are Locked On Irish, your daily podcast on the Notre Dame Fighting Irish, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
What's up, everybody? Welcome into Locked On Irish, your daily Notre Dame podcast. And today is Thursday, June 27th. And thank you for starting your day by making this your first listen of the day. I'm the host, Tyler Wojciak. I'm a Notre Dame alum and producer at Fox Sports. And this show is free and available on YouTube and wherever you get your podcasts. Quick reminder, though, before we get rolling, please like the video below and subscribe to the channel if you are watching along on YouTube. Or if you're listening to the podcast, please rate the show 5 stars, leave a review, and subscribe there as well. Today's episode is brought to you by Gametime. Download the Gametime app, create an account, and use code LOCKEDONCollege for $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. Okay, really excited about today's show. It's the first mailbag I've done in several weeks. I think it might even be a full month since the last time I did one, and I got a ton of great questions. So thank you to everyone who sent one in. Unfortunately, I don't think I'm going to be able to get to all of them in today's show, but it's okay because I'm going to do another one at the end of next week. So if I didn't get to yours today, I promise I'm going to get to it soon. Also, if you've got more questions, please don't hesitate to send them in my way. As always, you can submit yours in the YouTube comments or by social media. Just tweet me at LockedOnIrish or DM me on Instagram at LockedOnIrishPod. All right, now let's get to our first question, and this one is a big one. It comes from @NT Today. Marcus Freeman is going into his third year as head coach. Looking back at Notre Dame history, most great coaches either played in or won a natty by year 3. Is this a defining year for Marcus Freeman? The short answer is yes. This is a defining year for Marcus Freeman at Notre Dame, and he's right. Eric Parsegian, Dan Devine, and Lou Holtz all won a national championship in their third season with Notre Dame. And then Brian Kelly, who fans can say what they want about him, but he is the all-time winningest coach for the program, and he made it to a national championship in his third season, but unfortunately got absolutely housed by Alabama in South Beach. I was there. It was a whole lot of fun up until about the third play of that game. But anyway, let's talk about Marcus Freeman here, because I do believe that this is a defining season for him at Notre Dame, although I don't think it's a national championship or bust type of season. I do think it's college football playoff or bust for him. And not only that, I think he has to win a game in this college football playoff to make me think that, okay, he's going to be the guy that could potentially take this team to a national championship. Yesterday, I did an exercise with Luke Smith where we basically figured out what are the keys for Notre Dame to make the college football playoff, and then once they get there, what is the ideal path? And it got me thinking, like, okay, if Notre Dame goes undefeated, like I think they certainly can, they're going to have that 5 seed. And if they have that 5th seed, then they're going to play the group of 5 team, most likely, who made it into the 12-team playoff via the automatic bid. If they get the 5 versus 12 matchup, they should expect to win that game. And then if they win that, then they would play the 4th highest ranked conference champion. And there's a good chance that could be a 2, maybe even a 3-loss team, depending on how things shake out. So I really don't think it's unrealistic to expect Marcus Freeman to win not 1, but 2 college football playoff games this season. Again, it seems a lot right now, but when you really break it down, if Notre Dame goes undefeated, that should be the expectation for this program. Now, the one thing that I will say about this is I don't want to get too far ahead of myself, right? I don't want to say like, okay, well, now we have to expect Notre Dame to make the college football playoff semifinals, or else this year will be a disappointment, because if they go 11-1, they make the college football playoff, odds are they're not going to be the 5th seed, and if they end up beating, let's say, Oregon in an 8-9 matchup or something like that, and then they lose in the next round, that's still a really good year for Marcus Freeman. To me, I think that the reason it's college football playoff or bust is because this roster and his coaching staff that he did hire is just way too good to not make it this year. The schedule is also very favorable as we look at it today. Again, this could all change. Some teams are going to surprise us. Some teams are going to be a little bit disappointing compared to our preseason expectations. But when I look at the Marcus Freeman era, he's had 2 disappointing seasons so far as that coach. His first year in 2022, they should not have been ranked in the preseason top 5. That was too high. And then he had to deal with the fact that his starting quarterback separated his shoulder, had surgery, and missed the remainder of the regular season. Like most first-year head coaches aren't going to do that well when their starting quarterback goes down to week 2. But by that point, Notre Dame had already lost 2 games. Like that Marshall game was over, and that was a really, really bad loss for Marcus Freeman. So I would say the 2022 season was a disappointment, and even last year was a disappointment as well. You could blame some of that on the fact that Notre Dame wasn't able to get the offensive coordinator hire right. It looked like Marcus Freeman wanted to go in a different direction there. Either way, he ends up with Jared Parker. All that being said, they should absolutely have beaten Ohio State in that game. And I'm sure that there's a bunch of people you could point fingers to about the 10 men on the field on that last play of the game against Ohio State. Frankly, that falls on the head coach. So Marcus Freeman is partially at fault for that. He's also responsible for the fact that Notre Dame just laid an absolute dud in two of their biggest road games of the year, going at Louisville and then later in the season at Clemson. That is on the head coach to have his team ready to go and prepared to play on the road. Notre Dame, frankly, was not ready in either of those games. And honestly, they didn't look that great against Duke either. Fortunately for them, Sam Hartman and Wojciak Esme put the capes on and became superheroes on that last drive of the game. So fortunately, Notre Dame was able to win that game, and they didn't end up with 4 regular season losses. So I feel like there's plenty of signs that this program is headed in the right direction, right? The recruiting is at a really high level right now. They have a chance to close out this class for 2025 in the top 5. That's great. Certainly a reflection of the work that Marcus Freeman does on the recruiting trail. He's hired a really, really great staff. Kudos to him, and kudos to the Notre Dame athletic department for ponying up money-wise to get 2 of the best coordinators in the entire game on this staff. So he's got that going for him too. But at a certain point, all this great momentum has to translate to wins and losses on the field, and I feel very confident that it's all going to come together this year and that Notre Dame is going to make the college football playoff. If that does happen, I think everyone's going to feel really, really good about the Marcus Freeman era. I think they're going to look at it like, okay, year 1, there's improvement from year 1 to year 2. There was more improvement from year 2 to year 3. This program is heading in the right direction. Once these more recruiting classes come in, these really talented prospects come in, Notre Dame could be knocking on the door of a national championship here pretty soon. But if Notre Dame does not make the college football playoff, that's the 3rd year in a row that it's been disappointing. And for all the momentum and for all the reasons that we love Marcus Freeman, if he has a disappointing season for the 3rd year in a row, that seat is going to get a little hot. Things could happen, injuries could happen. I'm not going to say like, oh, if they don't make the playoff, he should be fired or anything like that. That's ridiculous. We don't know what's going to happen here. But if Marcus Freeman is going to have success at Notre Dame, odds are, I would say, there's a very high probability that we're going to know at the end of this season because Notre Dame either made the playoff and they either met or exceeded all of the expectations that we have about this really talented team, at least during the preseason, or they're not going to make it, and these questions are going to get louder and louder and louder. I will say, if Notre Dame does make the playoff this year, this most likely means that they went on the road to beat Texas A&M, and it means they fixed the issues from last season because, as I mentioned, they really struggled on the road, and part of that is on the head coach, but I do believe that Marcus Freeman is willing to admit when he made mistakes, and he's willing to learn and constantly try to develop, which should be the expectation for every young head coach, but it's not, how it is for every single guy. And that's why I am very, very confident that at some point in Marcus Freeman's career, he is going to be an excellent head coach, like top 5 in the entire country, because he's very charismatic. He understands the game. He understands the importance of recruiting, and he works so tremendously hard on the recruiting trail. He's cutting edge. He's got all these things going for him, but it's just a matter of, is it going to work out at Notre Dame? Because, hey, Notre Dame doesn't have a super long leash. They're not very forgiving of head coaches who don't succeed early on. I believe that Marcus Freeman is going to succeed at Notre Dame, and I believe that this season is going to be our first real sign that, hey, this guy's starting to really figure it out now, and he's got this program on the rise. But in order for that to happen, this year is absolutely crucial. Again, not national championship or bust, but it is college football playoff or bust. And once they get there, I fully expect them to make some noise because I just think this team is that talented. I mean, they've got some questions at the offensive line position, sure, but I think when you look at the skill positions on offense, they are better than they've been as a collective in a really long time, particularly at the wide receiver position. Riley Leonard, he brings a bunch of tools to the table. He's got a really strong arm. He's a extremely talented runner, and the more that I think about Riley Leonard and Mike Denbrock's offense, I actually think I was undervaluing his running ability before because we'd kind of forgotten how important the quarterback run game is in some offenses in college football. It has not been a part of the Notre Dame offense for the past few years. It's going to be a huge part of it this year, and they have one of the best running quarterbacks in the entire country leading the way. And then on defense, I mean, I don't really have to break it down to you that much, right? You know about the All-Americans, Benjamin Morrison and Xavier Watts. Sure, they have to bring in some young linebackers, but hey, there's a ton of athleticism there and a ton of potential there. They've got a really high ceiling. And then on the defensive line, you've just got grown men at every single position. So this team is loaded with talent. They've got a great experienced coaching staff to surround Marcus Freeman. I think he's learned his lessons from the first 2 years as a head coach, and I think that everything is set up for him to make the college football playoff, and honestly, for Notre Dame to continue on that upward trajectory years down the road. So I feel very confident that this is going to be a defining season for Marcus Freeman and that Notre Dame is going to succeed. They're going to meet or exceed all of those expectations, and we're going to feel very, very good about Marcus Freeman after this year. All right, coming up next, EA Sports just named Texas A&M's Kyle Field as the toughest place to play in college football. So how should Marcus Freeman prepare his team to play in such a hostile environment? Today's episode is brought to you by Gametime. Gametime is an authorized ticket marketplace of Major League Baseball, which makes getting tickets faster and easier. Prices on the Gametime app actually go down the closer it gets to the first pitch. And with great last-minute deals, all-in prices, views from receipt, and their lowest price guarantee, Gametime takes the guesswork out of buying Major League Baseball tickets. Whether you've been planning to go to a game for weeks or if you're feeling spontaneous and want to hit up the nearby ballpark, Gametime is the perfect place for you. It's the only ticketing app that gives you complete peace of mind with your purchase. You can see the view from your seat on your phone before you buy, but my favorite thing about Gametime is the pricing shows your total cost up front, and you can buy tickets in seconds with just 2 taps. Take the guesswork out of buying tickets with Gametime. Download the Gametime app, create an account, and use code LOCKEDONCollege for $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. Again, create an account and redeem code LOCKEDONCollege for $20 off. Download the Gametime app today. Last-minute tickets, lowest price, guaranteed. All right, this next question comes from @ColtsDame35761. There's been a lot of talk about how tough Kyle Field is. How would you prepare for that kind of environment if you were Coach Marcus Freeman? Okay, so I don't know if you saw this. It went out on social media this week. EA Sports College Football, the new college football video game that's coming out soon that we're all super, super excited about, actually released their list of the toughest places to play. A lot of familiar faces up there. You got LSU, Tennessee, Ohio State, Penn State. But they had Kyle Field at Texas A&M number 1. That really surprised me. I know that they can fit like 110,000 people, but frankly, when I think of like the most hostile environments in college football, maybe it's because I've never been there. Also, I look at the fact that Texas A&M, their home record in the past, couple decades hasn't really been that great compared to some of the other top programs. I just don't really think it's that tough compared to some of the other schools. That's not to say that their fan base isn't extremely, extremely excited and loud during these games, but I think that you have to actually win a lot of those games to be considered the toughest place to play. Either way, it is definitely going to be a very difficult place for Notre Dame to play in, and I think there's 2 key factors here in terms of the preparation. You need to prepare for how loud it's going to be on the field during the actual game, but you also have to prepare for all of the moments leading up to the actual game. That includes the travel schedule, meetings once you're there, walkthroughs, everything that goes into playing on the food. Hell, even the food, the time that you're waking up, the time that you're taking a nap if you have the time on Saturday, which in this case they do because it's a primetime game. All of that goes into the equation. I think when you look back at what Notre Dame did last year, I mentioned the road struggles. You look at Clemson, you look at the Louisville game, just 2 absolute duds in both of those matchups. They even had a slow start on the road against NC State, and then after that rain delay, they came out firing on that 80-yard touchdown run by Wojciak Esme. But if you remember, that first quarter, they looked really sluggish in that one. They were not ready to play. And then in that Duke game, they had a touchdown on the opening drive, and then it felt like the rest of the first half, they would move the ball, and then things would just stall out. And the rest of the game, they weren't really playing that well on the road. So it's a small sample size if you look at the first 2 years, but I just think that one thing that Marcus Freeman has really struggled at is getting his team ready to play on the road. And Clemson is a hostile environment, sure. Louisville was on that night. NC State, Duke, those really aren't that tough of environments to play in, at least compared to, Kyle Field or Tennessee or some of the other schools that I mentioned earlier. So that has less to do with the environment and has more to do with the planning and getting guys ready to play when they're not playing at home. So to me, that's as important, if not more, than getting prepared to play with so much crowd noise going on around you. And I feel like when it comes to the crowd noise, they can, and I'm sure they will be practicing with the speakers on full volume for weeks leading up. It actually reminds me of 2014. I was a freshman that year, and I remember walking around campus it was probably like a Tuesday or Wednesday afternoon. And if you're familiar with the Notre Dame campus, right, if you're looking at the stadium from the tailgate parking lot to the right, that's where the practice field is and all that. I was on like the complete other side of campus, probably around the bookstore, I believe it was, and I was walking to, I don't even remember where I was, but I remember hearing the Seminole War chant as Notre Dame was preparing to play Florida State on the road that season. At the time when Jameis Winston was still there, they had that crazy winning streak, and you just hear it over and over and over. Like the entire time that Notre Dame was practicing, that song was blaring on the loudspeakers. It also reminds me of 2018 when throughout that offseason, Notre Dame was playing Enter Sandman during, lifts, during practices, during pretty much everything throughout the summer and in the lead up to the season. Then obviously the week that they played Virginia Tech, because Enter Sandman is sort of their song and they're known for having this really crazy environment. Although if you ask some people, it's a little overrated. But anyway, they really went all out in preparing for that crowd noise, because the year prior in 2017, Notre Dame laid an absolute dud on the road against Miami. So they recognized that, hey, they need to get better at get better at playing on the road and dealing with these hostile environments. So they just blasted these songs so that the guys were used to playing and being out there on the field with all of this crowd noise that is, going to be representative of what they're dealing with once they're actually there. So when you look at what they've done under Marcus Freeman, I actually thought they handled the environment pretty well at Ohio State in 2022 to open the season. I mean, there were reasons that team didn't win that game, but they were in it for the most part. You didn't see a ton of false start penalties, certainly not as many as they had against Georgia in 2019. And I was at that game. That was an extremely loud environment, and they were not prepared to play in that situation. So I would say that under Marcus Freeman, they've been prepared to play with noise going on around them. They just haven't really been clicking on all cylinders once the game starts when you're on the road. And when you are playing on the road in a hostile environment, if you come out slow and you give the other team some momentum to start the game, then you're just playing from behind the whole game, and it's really hard to play catch up. When you are on the road and you're dealing with that kind of crowd, the best way to silence them is just come out hot, score on the opening drive, score again, and really put the pressure on them so that the whole time the crowd has this like nervous energy. And sure, they'll still get loud on third downs and things like that, but now it's more of like a nervous reaction as opposed to them applying the pressure onto you and forcing you into, false starts and things like that. So that's really the key for me when it comes to Notre Dame at Texas A&M. They got to start out hot, particularly on offense, and make sure that the team has got some momentum going through that, because I just feel like if they get behind, they're going to start feeling that pressure. The crowd is going to get a little bit louder, and then all of a sudden human nature sets in, guys start pressing, and that is when you are more prone to making mistakes. But I think that if Marcus Freeman really keys on getting this team ready to go in terms of like the travel, make sure that they cross all their T's, dot their I's in the lead up, and then you just play all the Texas A&M chants, all that stuff during practice so that they're used to playing when they're not really able to hear that well. I think if they do all that, they'll be more than ready to play Texas A&M. Okay, next question. Similar to the one I just answered. This one comes from @TMill3. What would winning week 1 on the road at Kyle Field, an SEC opponent, night game primetime, mean, not only for Marcus Freeman, but this Notre Dame team as a program moving forward? So it would be a huge win for Notre Dame and Marcus Freeman because it's the season opener. They're underdogs right now, so technically it'd be an upset, even though Notre Dame is going to be ranked much higher than Texas A&M in the preseason rankings. But considering these playoff aspirations and everything that Notre Dame has going for them this season and their goals and all of that, they really need to win the season opener, because if you lose that season opener, it really just sucks all the momentum out of the program. And I'm not saying that if they lose the season opener, that means they're eliminated from the playoff, because I don't feel that's the case. They could lose the season opener, then run the table, win the next 11 games, and they're making the college football playoff. But that's going to be a lot harder to do. It's a lot harder to win those 11 games when you lose that season opener, because, as we discussed yesterday with Luke, then you're really operating with just razor-thin margins in every single game. If it's a close game, you realize, like, oh my God, this drive could be the difference between us making the playoff and us not making the playoff. That's been a familiar situation for teams in the past when it's a 4-team playoff, but now, if Notre Dame were to lose this season opener, they really just lose their mulligan in that case. And I think that they need to win that game in order to have a much better shot at making the playoff. In terms of, the future of the program and how big of a win would it be just beating an SEC opponent on the road, I have a lot of respect for the Texas A&M program, and I think that they're going to be really good under Mike Elko. But the fact that they're breaking in a new head coach, it's his first game with the program, like, they're not anywhere near as good as they're going to be in a couple years once Elko has a chance to recruit his guys and really establish a new culture in that program, because that's been a problem for them over the past couple years. I mean, they had one of the greatest recruiting classes of all time a couple years ago, and then seemingly every single guy transferred out because well, let's not lie about it. The reason they had the number one class is because that was the first year of legal NIL. They were ready to spend a boatload of money. They did, and then they started losing games on the field, and then maybe some of those checks didn't cash how these players expected them to, and a lot of them left. And that's a big reason why Jimbo Fisher got fired, and that's why they have Mike Elko. So even though they're a good program, it'd be a really great win. It wouldn't be like going into Georgia and winning in Athens. It wouldn't be like going into Alabama and winning at Bryant-Denny Stadium. It's not quite at that level, but it'd still be a very big win. And again, it has a lot more to do with the fact that Notre Dame struggled so much on the road last season. Like, to me, it just means like, okay, it's a really good win for the team. They have a much better chance of making the playoff, but more than anything, it shows that Marcus Freeman recognized the flaws in their preparation for road games last season, and he's spent this offseason working on that and improving it. So now we're actually seeing it come to fruition with a win on prime time in front of the college football world. So I'm really, really excited about this game. We're only a couple months away, really. And I can tell that everyone else is getting excited because I'm getting a lot more questions about that Texas A&M game. We're going to talk a lot more about it in the coming weeks. But I do think Notre Dame is going to be prepared for that environment. Also, having a veteran coach like Mike Denbrock as the offensive coordinator is going to help a lot, too. This is a guy who's been there. He's coached in these SEC environments for the past couple of years as the offensive coordinator for LSU. That is a guy who is not going to be fazed by the environment, and I think that his composure, his poise is going to be passed down to the players. They're going to feed off him, and I think they're going to come out ready to go on offense. And then on defense, I just don't really have that many concerns. They're going to be great. All right, coming up in segment 3, when will CJ Carr make his Notre Dame debut? And are we going to have to wait until 2025? Find out right after this. All right, our next question comes from @CSJenis. What game does CJ Carr see his first snap? So I thought about this for a while, and I actually think it's going to be the Army game later on in the season. To be honest with you, I really am not sure we're going to see him this year because he's the fourth-string quarterback. But I do think that they're going to bring him in against Army. Notre Dame's going to be blowing him out. And I think he's just going to come in to take a knee or hand the ball off. Like we saw Kenny Minchey very little last season. I did love when Marcus Freeman put him in to take the knee against Pittsburgh, the team that Kenny Minchey was committed to throughout the vast majority of his recruitment. And then he decommitted from Pittsburgh to go to Notre Dame at like the 11th hour. Big win by Tommy Rees and Marcus Freeman there on the recruiting trail. And I'm sure that it pissed off Pat Narduzzi so much. And if you listen to this podcast, you know we're not the biggest fans of Pat Narduzzi. But anyway, let's get back to CJ Carr. Last year, Notre Dame made sure to get Steve Angeli, who was the backup, real reps last season in the fourth quarter of blowouts, and I'm sure they're going to do that again this season because you need to have a backup who's worked with the ones before, who's not unfamiliar with coming in during the actual game and getting live reps, and I feel like that's going to happen again this year so long as Riley Leonard stays healthy. They're going to bring in Angeli just so he has some work, so that in the case that Riley Leonard does end up missing some time this year, Angeli has gotten real reps with the starters. So if they want to bring a young guy in to get real reps, I think Kenny Minchey has deserved that. I think that when you look at the depth chart right now, Kenny Minchey is clearly the third string quarterback. So if the Notre Dame coaching staff is like, okay, this game's over, Angeli, we know what he's got. Let's see what Kenny Minchey can do, or any of the young guys. They're going to go with Minchey. He's earned that. He's been with the program 1 year more than CJ Carr. I thought he was really, really impressive in the spring game, and he deserves his shot to go out there on the actual field and make some plays with, whether it be the backups, the ones, whatever. Kenny Minchey is going to get those reps before CJ Carr does, unless, of course, Kenny Minchey transfers or something like that. But I don't think that's going to happen. So CJ Carr is going to have to wait, unless CJ Carr ends up beating out Kenny Minchey as the third-string quarterback at some point in the season. That's a legitimate possibility. I don't think it's going to happen soon. Maybe it happens by later on in the year, but I think that might be, we might be getting a little too far ahead of ourselves because, again, I'm a believer in Kenny Minchey, man. He's not going to just give that up easily. And even though CJ Carr looks really good in the spring, and I'm really high on him, like he wasn't really doing that against the ones or things like that. Kenny Minchey at least has some reps going with that unit. So I think that Kenny Minchey is going to get those reps. But also, we live in a college football world where, like, when you have that really talented 5-star, 4-star quarterback that is the future of the program, you want to keep them invested. You want to keep them engaged. And I think you can do that by bringing them in, even if it's just for a couple snaps in garbage time. I do think that matters. It reminds me of, like, when Georgia had Jake Fromm and Justin Fields on the same team. Jake Fromm had just led Georgia to the national championship game during his freshman season, was a couple plays away from winning that game. Then they bring in Justin Fields, the 5-star, one of the top recruits in the entire country. And they wanted to keep playing Fromm because they felt like he had deserved it, and maybe they felt more comfortable with him running the offense at that point in time, just given his experience. But they still incorporated Justin Fields into the game by, giving him different run packages and stuff in the hopes that it would keep him engaged and he wouldn't transfer. Well, guess what? He ended up transferring anyway because he did not want to sit behind Jake Fromm any longer. I don't think it's going to be a situation like that with CJ Carr. I don't think Carr is the type of guy who's going to transfer after one season because he's not getting real reps. But still, with a player like that, it's good to get him out there, just get the crowd going, give him his first couple snaps this season. He can maintain that red shirt, and then hopefully we'll see him a lot more next season. But I really don't think we're going to see him a ton. I mean, unless, Riley Leonard gets injured, more guys get injured, and then all of a sudden you're throwing him out there. But I don't think that he's going to beat out Kenny Minchey as a third-string quarterback during fall camp. And if he ends up doing it, it's probably later in the year, and that's when he'll start seeing some snaps. Okay, our last question comes from Sean Foley. Riley Leonard setting the single-season quarterback rushing TD record aside, do you think Riley Leonard will lead the team in goal-to-go rushing touchdowns? I can't stop mentally replacing Minchey with Riley Leonard in the play from the spring game and can't wait to see him barrel through to the goal line. So if you don't recall what Sean is talking about here, there was a play in the spring game when Notre Dame ran quarterback power left with Kenny Minchey as the starting quarterback for the goal team, and he made a really nice play. I thought he was dead in the water when I was watching it live, and then he made a move, and then he got into the end zone by making a nice run play. And again, another reason why I think Kenny Minchey is going to be the third-string quarterback. That dude can move with his legs. I think he ran for 5 first downs in that game. So don't sleep on his ability as a dual-threat quarterback. But as for Riley, I do think that he is going to be Notre Dame's go-to, big back, right? Because when you look at the Notre Dame running back room, their biggest back in terms of weight is a freshman, Keidron Young. He weighed in at 229 pounds, and it's a bit of a change from last season when Notre Dame had Wojciak Esme, who was just an absolute tank coming through the line of scrimmage there. And even then, Wojciak Esme wasn't necessarily the main go-to back in short yardage situations, even though I don't really understand it as much as I appreciate what Jabron Payne does for this program. So I don't think it's a given that Keidron Young is going to come in for all the short yardage situations just because he's bigger. I think that they're going to use Riley Leonard, particularly in big games like Texas A&M, Louisville, Florida State, games like that. When they need a yard, they're going to give the ball to Riley Leonard, and they're going to run a legitimate read option where the quarterback can make the read, whereas last year it felt like whenever Notre Dame ran the read option with Sam Hartman, it wasn't really a read option because that ball was going to go to the running back. Sam Hartman not seem really interested in running the ball a whole lot last year, although he did have that nice touchdown run against Clemson. I really think that there's a good chance that Riley Leonard not only breaks the single-season rushing touchdown record by a Notre Dame quarterback, which I believe is 10, set by Deshaun Kaiser in 2010. I think he's going to shatter it. He had 14 touchdowns for Duke on the ground his sophomore year. He could get a lot more than that this season, but a lot of those are going to come in goal-to-go situations. He's a fast runner. He can elude defenders. He did that against Clemson last year in that season opening game when he basically shed 3 runners, and then he just ran, I think it was 30-plus yards to the score. Most of those touchdowns for Riley Leonard are actually going to come from within 10 yards. He's not breaking off huge runs like that all the time, kind of like a Jaden Daniels would or someone like that. So, yeah, I think he's definitely going to be Notre Dame's go-to back at the goal line. And also, don't sleep on Jadarian Price. He is a really, really good running back. He's big and strong, and I think he's going to get a lot too. But that's the great thing about having a running quarterback like this is that the defense is going to prepare or have to prepare for both of those guys when they line up in the backfield. And then it's just up to Riley Leonard to make the correct read, either give the ball up to the running back or take it himself. And then once he has the ball, he is just so big. And I'm starting to see it more now in pictures, like his size. And it's really impressive for a quarterback and what he can do. It's not like Cam Newton. Cam Newton was just different. I think he had the best single season of any college football player in the history of the sport. But he's like a few inches shorter, not quite as heavy, but he's got really broad shoulders, and he just has a way when he's got the ball in his hands to find a seam, find a crease, and just barrel his way through to get a first down or a touchdown. So as long as he's healthy, I fully expect to see a lot of Riley Leonard running the ball this season, and it's going to be fun because it definitely brings a new dynamic to the offense that, frankly, Notre Dame hasn't had in a really long time, and it just is going to make them that much more exciting. Okay, that's a wrap for today's episode, and that is another week of Locked On Irish in the books. Thanks again for making this your first listen of the day. I'm going to be back next Tuesday, and by that point, we're going to be just a few weeks away from the start of fall camp. I can't believe it's getting close, but we're almost there, and I'm going to have plenty more content coming your way throughout the month of July to get you ready. In the meantime, remember to subscribe on YouTube and wherever you get your podcasts. Have a great weekend, everybody. See you next week.